and it will like off and hope. Remember when I said this?
Considering as how Hudson in the same year released another fighter, Duel Heroes, a game frequently brought up in the argument for worst N64 game,
Well, I'm one of those people who doesn't like to just tell people something is bad. I prefer to show them something is bad. Which is why I ended up shelling out $2.95 for a copy of it. Why do I keep doing this to myself?
Before I go too far down the rabbit hole, let's backtrack a bit. There was a group called Produce Company Limited, which designed games primarily alongside two Japanese companies, Enix and Hudson Soft, working on games such as Brainlord and most of the Super Bomberman series. As focus shifted to the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, the N64 saw some certain genres fall behind in its game library. Of particular relevance to this video, fighting games. For a while after the N64 launched, there was Killer Instinct 2, which didn't release in Japan, and not much else of note. Remember, Smash Bros. Didn't come out until 1999. Perhaps that's why Produce was set to work on Duel Heroes, despite not having any background in fighting games. Their game would get delayed for roughly a year, and then take almost a full year after its Japanese release to reach the US on Halloween of 1998, the same day Apocalypse starring Bruce Willis hit the PlayStation, a game which I gave a resounding out of 10. In that time, N64 exclusive fighting games such as Fighter's Destiny, Deadly Arts, Mace the Dark Age, and Clay Fighter 63 1/3 hit store shelves. For better or worse, Japan didn't get most of these titles.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, standards for fighting games were set pretty low by the time Duel Heroes came out.
Even so, reviews of the game at the time were, in a word, scathing. You know it's bad when Nintendo Power Magazine gives the most positive review, and in that review of a Nintendo exclusive title gives it a 6.6 out of 10 and says, quote, "This game doesn't add much to what we have in the fighting library." And need I remind you what that fighting game library primarily consisted of, especially in Japan?
0 divided by 0, zip, nada, bupkis.
Bupkis, huh? What does bupkis mean?
Nothing.
As you might be able to guess just by looking at it, the people behind Duel Heroes primarily worked on such things as kaiju films and Super Sentai movies and television shows before this, right down to the motion capture actors. Arguably the biggest name is the director Keita Amemiya, or at least I assume so because his name is slapped on the back of the box for the PAL version. He's been involved in various Sentai works since the late 80s, doing everything from character and monster design, to sound effects, to directing. Prior to this game, he'd worked on projects like Chojin Sentai Jetman, Ultraman USA, and several Kamen Rider movies and shows such as Black, Black RX, Zeo, and J. And this wasn't his first time working on a video game, as he'd worked on Hagane for the Super Nintendo prior to this, and many years later, he'd lend his talents to Shin Megami Tensei 4. Actually, what else does the back of the box say? N64's first 3D fighting action game? In Europe, that wasn't true. Excited battle against the CPU gamers with personality?
I never thought I'd be able to do this bit again, but Hudson Translate Hamburger Statue Laser Show!
Technically, Electrobrain published it in North America, but whatever. And you know what Electrobrain is doing now?
0 divided by 0, zip, nada, bupkis.
Electrobrain went bankrupt and shut down in 1997. This was the second to last game they ever released, so at the very least, their epitaph could read, Electrobrain. At least Duel Heroes wasn't our swan song.
When it did release, there was a big marketing push for it in Japan, with Bandai making an Extra Heroes action figure line. There was also an official Hudson fan book and even a guidebook.
Oh, you don't know how funny that is yet.
According to the text crawl from the game's story mode, there was a day of judgment when the tectonic plates shifted around and formed a new continent in the Atlantic Ocean 120 years ago. Wait, 120 years ago? What year is it now? People tried fleeing to space, but less than half the population made it. Then the story jumps forward 100 years, and after lots of rebuilding, people discover a mineral called Gaiathist.
Add this to the long list of games that slaps the word Gaia on something, seemingly just because they can. I have no doubt the people in this game dug up other minerals such as Gaiamins, Gaiarite, and of course, Fool's Gaia.
Gaiathist becomes a source of seemingly endless energy, an energy similar to gravity? Yeah, the awkward translation job wasn't limited to just the text blurb on the back of the box. Anyway, people begin to fight each other for some reason, but can't do it the conventional way because of Gaiathist's presence. Sounds to me like they need to learn how to curve the bullet. The suits used to mine Gaiathist get converted into combat suits, but the war gets interrupted by an alien invasion from the Zodgara Empire.
Sworn enemy of the Galactic Alliance!
Their Emperor Zor takes over the world and uses a device on the new continent called the SAP, which as best as I can tell stands for Super Gravity Producing Device. But instead of forcing everyone in its path to speak Spanish, it increases gravitational force in the area so high, only people wearing the special suits from earlier can survive under it.
So I guess it can be assumed that everyone else is either dead or living on the water, waiting for the day that they can return to dry land. No, let's just assume they're dead.
And it's up to these characters to storm the Emperor's tower and defeat him. Even though that wouldn't stop the SAP's effects, and they're going to unite against him by beating each other up until only one person is left to storm the tower. And you know why they do that?
Because we're idiots?
Right.
Most of the characters' names were left untranslated. Some make sense on their own, like Hana, Japanese for flower, or Gun, English for gun. But then there are other characters like Guy, which looks for all the world like it's supposed to be Guy. Or Joy. Each one also has their own theme music, which plays when you hover over them in the selection screen or when you fight against them. And the bulk of it is forgettable background noise, save for the stereotypical Japanese music for Hana. Or the high-pitched synthetic flute sounds for Kumo, which gave me a headache after a while. Just looking at some of these character designs, you might say, wait a minute, some of these suits look completely impractical for mining operations like the one the text scroll said they were used for, and they also have parts of the people's faces exposed, so wouldn't they be vulnerable to the supergravity?
And I might say, congratulations! You thought about this way more than the developers did.
When you select a character, their complete bio scrolls up the screen along with the name of their fighting style. Or maybe it's their nickname, I don't really know what this is. There's a military soldier, a super ninja, a bionic beast, a dragon kung fu, a dancing lady, a cutie chaser? I guess that means she likes playing Dance Dance Revolution. Dirty fighter. What, does Zen throw sand in his opponent's eyes before punching him in the dick over and over?
Cock puncher.
Also, the game letterboxes whenever you aren't in a menu. I'm not sure why. Maybe the game itself is squinting at the bios for these characters, wondering where South Australia is, or if March 3rd is different from March 3rd.
I think we need to take a step back and appreciate the rich geography presented by the futuristic world this game takes place in. A world with places like Hong Kong, Neo-Tokyo, and of course, the Fluting Continent.
The immediate problem with Dual Heroes is the controls. There were only 2 attack buttons, punch and kick. Hudson eventually found a way to make individual punch and kick buttons work with the Bloody Roar series, but here, not so much. Any special moves, abilities, or combos for each character are fairly limited, to the point where everyone has a little over 6 combos and maybe a dozen special moves. But when I say special moves, I mean moves that aren't the standard punch or kick. I'm even counting throws in that definition, of which each person has 2, and the bulk of which are either wrestling moves or laughably animated even by mid to late 90s standards. Most of the combos are also dirt simple, such as the dreaded punch kick combo, or how about kick punch kick, or the dreaded punch kick combo. By default, the A button is punch, B button is block, and down C is kick. Calling this poorly thought out is an understatement, as I wound up accidentally hitting block several times when I wanted to attack someone. Why not make the 2 largest buttons the attack buttons instead of awkwardly tossing kick on one of the C buttons? Especially with block also being assigned to the R button. Granted, the buttons can be reassigned, however the D-pad can't be used at all, and the game doesn't even mention that the L button changes the camera angle from a side view to this top-down view, which makes move inputs and basic movement about as awkward as movie mode in Shadows of the Empire. When you're knocked down, if you don't press anything, your character will stay on the ground and absorb whatever punishment your opponent sees fit. You have to mash the block button in order to stand up, which still takes so long you'll probably get hit anyway, but you can attack while standing by pressing down C and up or down. And when the opponent is down, you need to hit block and punch, or block and kick to attack them while they're down.
Why did they feel the need to make the controls more complex than they had to be? Just assign either of these functions to punch or kick, maybe with a directional input to go along with it, and that would be way simpler. Oh, and speaking of overcomplicated controls,
each character has a super form of sorts they can enter called Lethal Change. In this mode, a character gains a certain bonus for a limited time, such as being able to do half damage to a blocking opponent, or stunning an opponent by blocking one of their attacks. Several characters have the same effect, but everyone activates Lethal Change the same way. By pressing block 3 times, then holding block, then waiting for an excessively long transformation sequence to complete. What, you mean this couldn't be assigned to one of the several unused buttons on the controller? And no, you can't assign Lethal Change to one button. Even with an easier input, this takes so long that not only did I almost never do it, but the only times I saw an opponent do it were when I let them do it. Because even when I got knocked down, I had plenty of time to stand up, walk up to them, and punch them in the face. This mechanic, like other things in this game, feels like it was designed for an actual Sentai TV show, wherein time would stop completely while the hero did a bunch of nonsensical poses and powered up. Here, it doesn't work at all. The heroes still pose before and after the fight, usually in utterly ridiculous ways which make you wonder if the people performing the motion capture were able to do this without laughing. One thing which was consistently responsive was the evade command, done by holding block and moving the control stick side to side, which is a decent way to end up behind your opponent if you space it just right. There's also a completely useless evade you can do straight up in the air. Well, completely useless except for when you do this. Something which happens a lot is ending up facing away from your opponent, because your attacks or reactions to attacks or dodges can end up steering you away from them. The Z button is supposed to turn you around, but it's also tied to 3D movement, which doesn't feel comfortable at all. Most of the time, mashing an attack button did a better job turning the character around. It doesn't help that if you accidentally do a quarter circle while holding Z, it'll make you do a quick strafe to one side, which can end up killing you if you do it when you don't want to or you're on a stage with no walls. Another thing which can cost you in battles, the camera. It always seems to rotate way too slow to keep up with the fight, which causes inputs for any moves to be reversed until it can move back into position. It also tends to either zoom out to the point that you can't see the action well, or zoom in to the point that both fighters temporarily disappear.
Too close. A little too close.
I will give Dual Heroes this much. They tried to make the characters a bit different from each other. Their stances are a bit different. Not everyone does the same basic combos. Their evades cover different distances at different speeds. And big characters, or character since he's the only one this is true for, like Gun can't do leaping evades at all. However, everyone gives and takes virtually identical damage, so it's kind of ridiculous when the largest, strongest character in the game and the smallest, fastest character in the game deal similar damage. Maybe having everything similar was a theme, because every stage is just a floating rectangular platform with a different JPEG in the background. The only difference is sometimes there's a quote-unquote wall around the stage. Sometimes there's a force field which damages whoever touches it. And sometimes there aren't any walls at all. And as you might have seen earlier, there are ring-outs in this game.
Remember that for later.
Then there's the pace of the fighting. Most of the moves are pretty quick, but everything else, including the recovery time, is incredibly sluggish. There's a constant, uncomfortable stop-and-go feeling to each fight, like you're sitting in a car with a first-time driver who hasn't gotten used to using the brakes yet. There is a bug in the Japanese version which speeds everything up, but I haven't found a way to do this in either the PAL or North American versions. That awkward pacing may be due in part to a key defensive mechanic at work in Dual Heroes, which is, if you block an opponent's attack, it restores a little health. A little health. Typically you have to block 2 or 3 attacks to restore enough health to be able to absorb one regular punch. And the longest combos in this game are around 5 moves, with some able to add 1 or 2 extra shots at the end.
Man, after playing this I'm looking back and feeling kind of bad for what I said about War Gods. Okay, not really, but War Gods is a better game than this.
Unlike in War Gods, where the AI is mercilessly difficult on all but the very easy setting, Dual Heroes has the exact opposite problem. I should note that the game by default is set to normal, which is the lowest difficulty. 2 things. 1, it's not that the first few fights are so simple I could throw the same basic punch combo over and over and win easily. It's that I could do this against every single character in the game, with every single character in the game, and in the later stages I could still do this so long as I sometimes stopped punching or performed a dodge or a leg sweep. And that's not just on normal difficulty, I did it on hard mode as well.
You might say that normal, being the lowest difficulty, is actually the easy difficulty, so I shouldn't be as hard on the stupid AI. A bunch of games have normal as the lowest difficulty, and I'm going to say the same thing for this game that I would say for any of them. They had every opportunity when they localized this game to call it easy instead of normal. They didn't. So I'm not going to consider it as such.
I did make the effort to try and learn a character or 2 in this game. Learn their moveset, learn their strengths, learn how to connect some of their combos into special moves and vice versa, and the end result was that I did worse than I did just spamming punches. Combos are annoying to try and pull off, as you need to keep waiting on recovery times between moves, or get your timing thrown off because the game lags a bit in nearly every stage, though it's egregiously bad whenever someone hits a force field. 2, the opposing AI frequently does stuff like this. And this. And this. Someone forgot to give the AI in this game spatial awareness, because it never seems to know where the edge of the arena is. Beyond that, it also has a habit of running off in a random direction in the middle of a fight.
I thought I was doing something to manipulate the AI into jumping off the edge of the stage by accident. But then I watched the demo fights, which happen if you sit on the title screen for too long. Remember, I have no input on this. This is just 2 AI opponents trying to fight each other.
Nice man.
No!
Meet your maker. Gotcha. Once more.
Good.
Needless to say, anytime I was on a stage without walls, I'd wander around the edge until I could get the opponent to fall off of their own accord. Even if they didn't, I could still do this. If you're wondering what those faces in the corners of the screen were, they're part of a mode called Virtual Arcade. It's supposed to be an arcade from the future where patrons are playing a game called Heroes. You can even make your own avatar and name, which displays as your profile. There are a small assortment of people here you can face, each of which have their own preferred characters and fighting styles, and appear to be concept art which somehow made it into the full release. In other words, this is the game trying to have a fallback for if you can't find anyone to play against. It's a pretty useless mode, but the one reason you might use it is not for the fighting, but for the mid-fight banter. Voice acting was a low priority for this game, as evidenced by the fight announcer sounding like a smooth jazz radio DJ.
Ready? Fight!
Ready? For the Virtual Arcade, the players attempt to react to the action mid-fight or taunt you, with heavy emphasis on the word attempt.
No! Die! Now you die! Good one! Take that! How's that?
Oh my!
Let's fly. Once more.
Good one! Die! Yeah! Take that!
I'll glaze your ham.
One of the most entertaining things you can do in this game is watch the demo fights at the title screen. Here, both fighters are controlled by Virtual Arcade characters, and the poorly acted banter rarely ever stops. One of the characters in the Virtual Arcade is a robot. The robot is something you can train to use a certain fighter by doing various things to it in the equivalent of practice mode. You punch it, it learns how to punch. You throw it, it learns how to throw. The indicators at the bottom of the screen indicate how well it knows how to do things like attack, defend, use combos, use 3D movement, and stuff like that.
Wait a minute. That's where Nintendo got the idea for amiibos!
However, the robot serves only two functions in this game. You can use it for two-player versus, or you can use it to fight the people in the Virtual Arcade. Just for the hell of it, I only taught the robot how to do leg sweeps with this one character. And it won. You can also fight the robot as an opponent in the Virtual Arcade, which serves absolutely no purpose. The robot only learns to fight when you go against it in the robot mode. Come to think of it, why doesn't it get better at fighting from facing you in matches? And how come it doesn't get better at fighting when facing the Virtual Arcade players? Either way, I didn't want to use the robot for versus mode or the arcade, because no one in their right mind would play this game with me, and I was much better off fighting the arcade people myself than trusting some shoddy AI. Also, it only learns to fight for one character at a time, so if you wanted to use a different character than whatever you taught it before, you have to pick that character and spend even more time slapping the robot around. So really, the robot is only there for if you're incredibly lazy, but not so lazy that you won't spend a ridiculous amount of time beating up a nigh unresponsive doll.
Now that you've completely forgotten about it, let's get back to story mode. Which is actually just arcade mode. Bloody Roar 2 story mode, this is not.
After the preliminary text crawl, you play through a total of 10 stages, fighting the other 7 playable characters and then facing... Gyne?
Oh, a game.
Gyne is one of Zor's sergeants. You can probably guess how this fight went. Then you face Zor, a guy with a visor so goddamn impractically huge I wanted to rip it off his head and throw it like a paper airplane. When you beat him the first time, this happens.
Ready? Fight!
Where do I even begin with this? I'm going with D.
On the streets, I'm just a geezer. Gotta make ends meet, yeah. Gotta do what I need to. Shit, we all got our run-ins now.
Once you do what you need to deal with the Giza, you get the fighting game icon of laziness, a text ending. The same goddamn text ending for every character in the game, which suggests the Gaiathist, which, by the way, we never see, has some corruptive properties and the fight isn't really over. So yeah, the backstories to these characters don't mean a goddamn thing. Guy set out to avenge his fallen comrades and free his people. Gun is also out for revenge as Zor killed his squad. Ho's trying to reclaim his island, which was overrun in the invasion. Kubo's theater was shut down and show business was banned. Because I guess the Zygira Empire saw Footloose and thought the guy from Third Rock from the Sun was really onto something. Everyone gets this generic ending, which usually has little to nothing to do with what they were supposedly fighting for. Even the original Mortal Kombat put more thought into this.
Stuff like this makes the time and effort put into getting through a game, even one as short as this, seem like a waste. I'm not asking for a medal for beating the game or anything, but it would...
Every time you finish story mode, you medal get. Each medal shows how long it took for you to finish story mode and its current level. Usually it's at 1, but if you complete it fast enough and don't have to continue a lot, you'll get a level 2 medal on normal. Yes, the medals have levels. You can hold up to 6 of them at once, which seems like a weird and arbitrary limit, and use them as betting chips in versus matches. Winning causes a medal to level up until it hits 20, at which point it becomes gold.
It's an alright idea to try and incentivize head-to-head play, but here's my problem with this. They put in the virtual arcade so you could go against a player even if you didn't have a human opponent. Medals don't work in the virtual arcade.
You'd think, even if not on the default difficulty, medals would be usable against someone on Expert in the virtual arcade, but no. Mine are just going to sit in this fiery abyss collecting more dust than my Dual Heroes cartridge.
No, wait. No, that won't work. I keep my N64 games in this big plastic cabinet, so it can't collect dust there. Where else could I put it? The console shelf. No, I have a bunch of Wii and GameCube controllers stacked up there. I can't put it there. Where else? The shelf next to the TV. I already have a stack of games building there, so what's one more for the pile? Hold on, I'll be right back. And with that, I put more effort into this stupid joke about the game collecting dust than the developers put into most of the game.
Dual Heroes is a disjointed mess. It's built on a couple good ideas and good intentions, but in the end, it looked like more time went into the merchandising than into the gameplay. Combat feels downright uncomfortable, and even with the ridiculous Sentai influence, the characters and their designs are creative afterthoughts, to the point I've had to keep referencing the character bios for this video because I couldn't remember most of their names. Even the extras are kinda lacking. There are a couple unlockable fighters and virtual arcade characters, but they aren't worth the effort. This game is a 10-minute curiosity at best, but I'll still put it above Bloody Roar 4 because at least there was nothing for Dual Heroes to ruin.
Even for $2.95, I still feel like you could do a lot better than this. Hell, for a little more than that, you could almost afford one piece of Street Fighter DLC. Or if you wanted an actual full game, you could find Virtua Fighter 2 or Eternal Champions for around the same price. I'm actually not a big fan of Eternal Champions, but the sequel did introduce one character who would wipe the floor with everyone in this game. Don't fuck with this, Senator.